to the politics of policing in Victoria. In the lockdowns, police arrested a woman in front of her kids at home simply for posting about a protest. In contrast, police did flat nothing when pro-Israel supporters at a rally in Melbourne last week were threatened by pro-Palestinian supporters.
Every child in Palestine born to come and kill you! I'll kill you! I'll kill you!
You hear that?
All of you to kill us!
Kill policemen! Are you dead now, officers? These are these
It's not enough!
I have it on camera. I just threatened to kill. Are you going to do anything?
I kill you, I kill you. Only now, after a complaint was officially lodged with police, do police say, oh, we'll check it out. Now, about these pro-Palestinian protests, often so ugly, how come not one that I have seen, not one of their organisers, like Nasser Mashni, has said a word of support for some of the bravest protesters I've seen? I'm talking about the Palestinians in Gaza now, protesting against the Hamas terrorists who are running that territory and hiding behind the civilians as they fight. Hamas has now moved to crush those protests against it. Since Friday, it has murdered 6 protest organisers and tortured this man, this Palestinian man, for 4 hours before dumping him, dying, outside his family home. His father spoke at his funeral.
A group that belongs to Al-Qassam Brigade kidnapped our betrayed son, Odai al-Rabai, with a silly excuse, and they tortured him to death without taking in consideration his mother's and relatives' feelings. They betrayed him and killed him, thus we shall hit with an iron fist. Those oppressors and criminals that took this Muslim and killed him unjustly.
Where's Nasser Mashni on that? The coward attacking my children instead of dealing with that. Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of The Australian. Greg, what's going on with these Palestinian protests in Gaza against Hamas? I mean, you don't see protests against Hamas from the left here.
No, Andrew. Great to be with you. Look, this is a terrible business. Hamas is a savage, extremist death cult, and it's outlawed as a terrorist outfit in Australia and the United States and many other places. We remember when they first took power, they found people they knew to be gay and threw them off the top of tall buildings. And naturally, of course, they get sympathy from the Greens in Australia. These people who are protesting against Hamas rule in Gaza have been driven to despair by the actions of Hamas. Hamas runs a completely totalitarian regime within Gaza. It is savage, vicious, violent and despotic within its own rule within the Palestinian enclave. What has happened to the people of Gaza is tragic. You can't be indifferent to this terrible suffering, but it is all 1,000% the responsibility of Hamas. Certainly Israel's campaign would stop tomorrow if Hamas released the hostages. And yet, you know, from the Albanese government down, no energy in Australia on the left is directed at Hamas. It's always directed at Israel. And the left doesn't care about human rights. It just cares about hurting its enemy. Its enemy is Israel. It couldn't care less about Palestinian human rights. It only cares about hurting Israel.
I suspect you are only too right. Greg, this Chinese research vessel, or actually spy ship, shall we call it, sailing off Victoria, a story broken by colleague Sherry Markson. The Prime Minister's reaction, oh yes, but you know, we've got the ships doing this kind of stuff. Well, we've got ships in the South China Sea, same. Is that all there is to this?
Well, the Prime Minister is increasingly bizarre on defence, increasingly bizarre. First of all, well, of course, everybody in the know knows that we spy on China relentlessly, obviously, but Prime Ministers don't make reference to our spying activities. I mean, this is crackers. I can't imagine what the Labor Party's reaction would be if a coalition Prime Minister said, well, yes, of course we spy on China all the time. A bit like when Tony Abbott had to bear responsibility for the listening devices authorised by the Rudd government against the Indonesian president. Similarly, the Indonesians spy on Australia as well. But this pattern of Chinese naval activity around Australia is much more aggressive than that. As you've pointed out, this is a ship which has the capability of cutting seabed cables. And as we've discussed on this program before, China has effectively adopted a wartime economy and is increasingly trying out war-fighting capabilities, which allow it to hurt nations like Australia in the event of conflict. Now, we spy on China all the time, but we couldn't possibly do them any harm. Our pathetic little navy, can barely make it all the way up to the Chinese coast without special, getting the RACV or the NRMA or something to give them roadside assistance on the way. We couldn't do China any harm. And the way the Prime Minister just brushes it all aside, because he doesn't want to spend $1 more on defence, his spending is grossly inadequate. He's cancelled military capability after military capability, so he just pretends there's nothing to see here. I mean, it's a Walter Mitty. He's like Mr. Magoo or something in the strategic environment.